So today we're working on CodingBat array2, notAlone. So we'll say that an element in an array is alone if there are values before and after it, and those values are different from it. So if we're at a particular value, the value before and after it, since those values are different from the value that we're looking at, which will be specified as value in the second parameter of the method itself. Since that particular value, the values before and after it are different, we'll say that the element is alone, the value val is alone. But of course, if it's not alone, then of course the element next to it, that is of course to say the element after and before it, those can be equal to the value, in which case it would not be alone. And we want to return a version of the given array where each and every instance of the given value, which is alone, is replaced by whichever value to its left or right is larger. So if we do have a value which is alone, that is to say the value next to it and the value before it, or the value right after it and the value before it, if it's not equal to the value, then we want to judge which is bigger. Is it the value to the right or the value to the left? And whichever one is bigger, we'll just replace the current value that we're on, value, val, with that number. So I actually want to open IntelliJ for this one. So first things first, you'll notice that in the test cases, and this was before, you can go back and look at the video, but and this is, of course, it makes intuitive sense as well. If we want to check a particular value before and after the value, it has to be nested within two values. That is to say, it has to be the middle of a couple values, which would be 3, right? So in order for something to be in the direct middle of something, it has to have at least one value to the left and one value to the right. So I'm going to open by saying if nums.length is essentially less than 3, then I'm going to return nums, which is actually what this program does. If you look at the test cases. Otherwise, I'm going to open up a for loop. Okay, int I is equal to 0, I must be less than nums.length, and we'll increment I by 1 each time. And this is essentially the body of the for loop here. Now, essentially one thing that we want to note is that we actually don't want to start looking at the 0th index. That is to say, we don't want to start looking at the first element in the array. We actually want to begin looking at the first index, which is actually referencing the second element. And we do this because there's no way that the first index can be there's no way that the first index in the array can check the value before it, because there are no values before it. The first index in the array, which is referenced by the 0th index, well, the first element in the array which is referenced by the 0th index is in and of itself the only element, and that begins the array. There's nothing to the left of it, and so we start our count, our array from 1. And so I must be less than nums.length. So what we're going to do is, as we're looking at our array, if at all, nums of I equals val, and val, of course, was what we're supposed to look for. And I'm just going to initialize val to some arbitrary number here so that my program works. So if nums of I is essentially equal to val, then we're going to come inside the for loop, and we'll essentially if nums of I is equal to val, we'll check if the value before it is before nums of I is greater than the value after nums of I. And if nums of I minus 1, that is, of course, if the number before it is greater than the number after it, after nums of I, then nums of I will be set to nums of I minus 1, which was, of course, the greater of the two, the greater of the one which followed or the one which came before in terms of elements. Otherwise, if, and we'll just bring this up here, otherwise, if nums of I, minus 1 is less than nums of I plus 1, then nums of I can be set to nums of I plus 1. Okay. So we've really checked the value before and the value after val, and we've set it to whichever one was bigger. Now, a thought here is that we're actually incrementing, we're actually referencing an index and incrementing the index by 1. So we want to mitigate the fact that we could be at the end of the array by iterating only for nums.length minus 1 times. And after it's all said and done, I'm sure we can just return the array, or return nums, really. And if we bring this into CodingBat, you'll see that we get all greens but one instance. Now, this one instance is essentially the fact that we haven't taken into account. So you'll see here that as we're looking through the array, we come to 1, and the element before 1 is 1, and that means that this is not alone. It is not needed for a number to both have the same number on the right and the left. Even if it has it on any side, then it classifies as being not alone. So we have to take into account in our where we actually enter this for loop, which is here. If nums of I is equal to val and nums of I minus 1 does not equal to val, and nums of I plus 1 does not equal to val, then and only then would it make sense to make that assessment. So we get all greens there.